be engaged in your work because it shows up. And if you don't love what you're doing enough, or you don't love the company enough or the organization enough to be engaged, to be curious, to be the one who wants to try to solve that problem, to be the one who wants to do some of this work, then maybe it's not the right place for you.
Welcome to Leading with Relevance. This is our 10th episode, and it's a podcast series featuring what I like to say is some of today's most prominent leaders. And they're people that are generally busting through the status quo, impacting companies and communities. My goal is to interview and highlight personal, professional journeys of each leader and learn about their whys. And for listeners, practical insights you can apply to your pathways. I'm Tino Mantella, loving the opportunity to talk to leaders, and I'm learning every time I do a podcast. So today I have the great pleasure to interview my friend, Hala Moddelmog, who I've known a number of years back, Hala, from the days you were in the Chamber of Commerce. And so let me talk a little bit about Hala before we bring her on. Today, she's the CEO of Woodruff Arts Center, and that's been since September of 2020. She also serves on two public company boards, and she's done that for more than 7 years, both Corpay and Lamb Weston. Uh, Most of you may know Hala for leading and the tremendous job she did leading the Metropolitan Atlanta Chamber, stepping in January 2014 and running that organization for 6.5 years. The first female president of the organization, something like 100 and how many years is it, Hala?
I
100,
think it's been about 160 years. Yeah.
160 years.
Yeah.
Prior to Chamber, she served as the president of Arby's Restaurant Group. She's a breast cancer survivor, and in 2006, Hala stepped in to lead Susan B. Komen for The Cure for more than 3 years as president and CEO of the largest grassroots network devoted to eradicating breast cancer. Hala also served as a corporate director for 4 New York Stock Exchange companies and a board member of a private portfolio company under the Carlyle Group. Also spent most of her life and career growing up in Hartwell, Georgia, and attending Georgia Southern and UGA. And today she lives in Ansley Park with her husband, Steve. She has 2 adult children, 2 son-in-laws, and 3 grandchildren. You've got me beat by one. I have 2 grandchildren. She's received numerous awards and recognitions. A couple I'll mention: the YWCA's prestigious Women Achievement Award, and also the TurkNet Leadership Group when I was there, the Lifetime Achievement Award. And that was great fun during the COVID years. Hala, we made it work. So thanks for joining me again on Leading with Relevance. I appreciate it and appreciate you.
Well, absolutely, Tina. Thank you for having me, first of all. And you're right, you and I go back a long way. And so we've worked on lots of different things in this market that we both love. And so I'm just very pleased to be here. Thank you for the kind introduction. Absolutely.
Well, it was fun too when we worked together, because when you were at the Chamber and I was running TAG, those were the days that I think in the early days, people really didn't know technology was one of our major thrusts. And then look at it today, we're one of the leading states in the nation in terms of technology. And I think the Metropolitan Chamber and TAG both had a lot to do with that. So,
Totally agree. And yeah, we've come a long way from that first conversation.
yeah. So I'd love to start out with because I think a lot of times people's journeys do start in the early years, kind of shape their life. So maybe if you could tell us a little bit about your early years and 2 or 3 people that influenced you during your childhood days.
Yes. Well, I feel very fortunate about my upbringing. I was, as you mentioned, I was born in a small town called Hartwell, Georgia. It's about an hour 15 up the road on I-85. And we really just kind of had the all-American family. I felt really loved growing up. I felt challenged, loved unconditionally by my mother, and challenged by my father to work hard and do the best I could at anything. So it was kind of a nice thing. I had an older brother who was really fabulous and a younger sister. So, absolutely no complaints. And I would say that obviously both my mother and my father influenced me growing up, and for different reasons. And again, I think if you're lucky enough to have someone loving you unconditionally, and if you're lucky enough to have someone who wants to make sure that you are going to do everything you're capable of doing, and that you're not going to waste a minute. I mean, we didn't have a TV when I was growing up
Oh,
because
wow.
that was wasting time. Okay. So anyway, it was a wonderful way to grow up, and they definitely influenced me. And I think just growing up in a small town where you know everybody, and it's a community that gives each other. And my father did a lot of community outreach work. He wasn't some fancy executive or anything like that, but he really, felt that it was important to give back. And so that was wonderful in my early years. And then, as I think Tino, because I think we've talked about it, unfortunately, my mother did pass away unexpectedly when I was 17 and she was 42. And that, of course, rocked my world at the
Yeah.
time. And it really gave me just this feeling of, nothing is given, nothing is for sure. And it really, really made me want to make sure that I could take care of myself financially and in all sorts of ways. And so it made me become sort of fiercely independent. And so that's kind of my background. I mean, hard work was, next to godliness. And that's just the way we rolled in a small town.
Yeah. I mean, I looked it up. I think there was less than 5,000 people now in your town. Did it feel small at the time? I mean, were you ready to spread your rings and leave out of there at some point?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it didn't, feel all that small in the beginning
Yeah.
because, it was your place. But and part of what's great about being in a small place is you can kind of, if you're willing again to do things in the community, to be involved, to do everything at school, not just the, whatever, and which my whole family did, you can sort of, be a little bit of a big fish in a small pond. But I do remember, and definitely by about the seventh or eighth grade, I was like, wow, yeah, this is small. And I would, lay in my backyard and look at the airplanes going by and say, look, someday I'm going to be on that airplane. And I did want to spread my wings, and I just wouldn't trade my upbringing for anything. But yeah, I was never planning on going back and living there. It just didn't even occur to me.
Yeah, I grew up in a small town also. So, you made some really good points. Sometimes we don't think about it. You know everybody. That's good and bad, I guess. From a standpoint of, uh, my high school class, I think was 170 years was, I'm guessing maybe smaller than that. And my wife's class was, I think, 1,500 people. So, she didn't know everybody that was in her class when we went back to one of those reunions. But yeah, small is interesting. It's good, and it's a good way to know people. So it's something that I think we learn from, and but also say, yeah, maybe there's something outside of those towns that we want to learn about. So, and then when you went on to school, you undergrad from Southern Georgia Southern with in an English degree and a master's in journalism from UGA. Have you been able to apply those learnings over time? Maybe the job that you have now is one of the things, maybe close to what you're doing, I would think.
You know what? It's interesting because, it's sort of like be grateful what you don't know, because if I had really known how the world worked, I wouldn't have majored in English. I would have majored in business, right?
Right.
But I majored in English because I loved literature. I just loved everything about it. And I didn't have any fancy guidance counselor or any fancy people telling me, wow, don't you want to get a business degree so you can get a job? So I majored in English, and but I will tell you just a tiny anecdote about my very first job out of graduate school, and it was with Arby's, and it was I and at that I've been with Arby's three times, so it was my
Oh,
first job with Arby's, and it was to be a sales analyst, and so the guy who was interviewing me, who was the chief marketing officer for the whole thing, he said, "Do you want to know why I'm interested in you?" And I said, "Sure, I'd love to know." And he goes, "It's because I know you can write." And even back then, I mean, we're talking the 80s, people were already talking about people don't know how to write anymore. They can't write. And so I was like, "Well, absolutely, sir, I can write and whatever." And he just really he was already living in a world of sort of being annoyed that so many people weren't good writers in terms of, and he wasn't talking about being creative, he was just talking about clarity and getting your ideas across. So the first job I ever had was crunching numbers, and that was way back before people had an individual PC. I was actually working on one of those little typing things,
uh-huh.
crunching my numbers and then turning those one numbers into meaningful strategies that had to be written down. So it actually worked out great. And actually, when I got my graduate degree, and my graduate degree is in journalism, but the thing is, you got to do a thesis, and so a thesis has to be based in numbers and facts. And so along the way, even though that's been my education path, it's always had to do with numbers and always had to do with making the numbers and kind of proving yourself and then getting it on paper or verbally for people to understand and be energized by.
What do you think, just kind of follow up with that today, because you did talk about, people now they're on their phones. There's very short kind of crisp, crisp might not be the right word, but messaging.
Yeah.
What would your message be to people in terms of having writing skills and the value in that?
Yeah, again, I'm going to sound like an old English teacher, even not much less somebody with a degree. But look, I think writing is very important, and also for clarity. And again, another potentially silly anecdote, but I am a huge fan and insistent everywhere I work of the Oxford comma. And that's the comma. If you've got three things in a row, you put the comma behind every item or word before you do the and. And the thing is, it is for clarity. And there's a famous law case where the Oxford comma was not used and it changed completely the meaning of that contract. And the other side got really burned. And I always use that because the young set really, oh, you don't need the Oxford comma,
You
and
even need
or
commas.
you don't even need
They would.
commas. That's right. So here I am preaching to the young set about Oxford commas. But the thing is, I always carry that with me wherever I go. People know that I'm a stickler. They know that I'm going to find stuff. And again, I don't do it just because. I do it because it's for clarity and it's for communicating. And
Yeah.
I'm just as guilty as anybody right now on text or things like that of just being so brief and just to the point, and that's okay when it's okay, but you still need to be able to be clear about the message you're delivering. And as a matter of fact, just a crazy thing happened literally this week. I was on a running as fast as I could to get to like the next thing, and I got an email from our general counsel here, and she asked me if I was okay with so and so, and then she had a lot of other things. She's an excellent writer, by the way. But my answer was just like, yes, I'm okay with this. So I wrote her back a message that just said the word yes, no punctuation, no nothing, just yes. And she, I think, was so taken aback that she emailed me again later on and said, I just want to understand, are you saying that you want to? So anyway, it's just, things have changed. And look, I love the young people and love what they represent, for the future in our country and all that kind of thing. But I do think writing is really important.
Yeah, and verbal communication skills too. Now
Absolutely. Yeah.
it's gone are the days, and used to laugh at the technologists that would say, just slide a pizza under the door. You don't know what the heck you're doing. Now it's like the CIOs are sitting around the boardroom table or the CISOs talking about,
Absolutely.
protecting your
Your your
growth
assets, everything. Yeah.
process. Yeah, for sure. So, you've had such a diverse career, for profit, not for profit. Mentioned Arby's 3 times in your career, Susan B. Komen, Woodruff, the Chamber, of course. Um, the way I wanted to frame it is, did you choose your path or did your path choose you?
I'm going to have to go with my path chose me. And I talked again to young people about this quite a bit. And I'm not saying it's the right thing to do by any means, but for me, I did not have some big plan. And the key to having the different roles that I've had is I've always been willing to take the risk. And the thing is, I've always been, once I proved to myself that really what you need to get something done is a good team around you, and a good team can be hired. It gave me all sorts of freedom to take on jobs that were different than jobs I'd done before, jobs where I might have known, 40% of what was supposed to be done and knew I had to learn the rest or depend on other smarter people to do the rest. And that's the reason it's been so varied. And so look, if you've got the nerve to to take on roles that, don't just follow a path, follow a path that you might expect, I say go for it. If that's not your comfort zone, then it's okay, and some people are just better, maybe more planful. And the thing I'd say about the planning part is what I've seen over my career on occasion when someone is very planful, like I want to get that VP title by the time I'm this age and whatever, that can backfire on you because you get too caught up in the titles or the money or whatever versus what you're doing. And we all know we're more productive when we're doing what we love. And one of my other issues is I do get bored pretty easily. If I've kind of conquered something, I want something new to learn and force me to grow and force me to think differently. And, frankly, going around through all these jobs, I mean, I haven't been bored for a second yet.
Couple questions to follow up on that. One is maybe a message. You've gone the nonprofit and the for-profit route, and you probably get as many calls as I do in relation to I'm in the for-profit, but I think I'd like to go to nonprofit or vice versa. And you've made that jump. What would your message be to people that are thinking of making the jump to the other side?
Yeah, I do get that call a lot, and I'm sure you do as well. I tell them a few things. One, I tell them, to me, it's really not that different. And the reason I say that is you got to make your numbers. Okay. It is just as important in a nonprofit organization to make the numbers, to
Yeah,
make your commitments, your financial commitments, and all other ones, as it is in a for-profit. And as a matter of fact, it might be even more important because when you are in a nonprofit, you are spending other people's money. And I have such a huge respect for that, that I take on a lot of accountability and responsibility for making my numbers that I sign up for and making sure that that money is spent well. So sometimes people think that, oh, nonprofit, it's easier, it's a
right,
little more laid back. And to me, that's an anathema. It just isn't. It is,
right,
we should be working harder in nonprofit, if anything. And then, the other thing that I'd say, is that the one thing that is easier in nonprofit is that your mission is so clear. And sometimes in the for-profit world, and it really depends a lot on the culture and the company that you're with, et cetera, it's more difficult to nail your mission and your why. And, I was trying to do that. I mean, I was president of Church's Chicken for about 10 and a half years, and we were doing that back then, way before we had, Simon Sinek talking about your why and all that, because we needed something to rally around. That was a little brand that hadn't had a lot of love in a long time when I got there, and we needed to have a mission around it as well as making the numbers. So I tell them the differences and I tell them the similarities. And I also tell them this. I was warned by one search firm, and I know you understand search, given your role right
Yeah.
now. Um, I was warned by one search firm when I went to Susan. It's Susan G. Komen,
Oh,
by the
Susan
way.
G.
Yeah,
Okay.
that's okay. Yeah, Susan G. Komen. I like to honor her, with her name. And so I was warned if I went there, I would never get a job in a for-profit company again. And I said, well, you know what? So be it. I'm going. I'm 50 years old at the time. I've had breast cancer. I kept my mouth shut about breast cancer all those years because I was working for publicly traded companies and nobody wanted to hear about cancer, much less breast cancer. So I didn't do enough. I haven't done enough for this cause. So I'm going. So I went, and then the next job after that was being the president of Arby's. So there
Yeah.
you go. And
Yeah.
then after that, I did choose nonprofit, and I chose it mostly because I wanted to stay in Atlanta, and mostly because it was that incredible opportunity to lead the Metro Atlanta Chamber. I mean, what a gift to do that in the town you love, and
Yeah.
has been my home for most of my career.
Yeah.
Not all, most.
Well, you made a lot of magic happen. I'm going to go back to something you said because I think it's worth kind of doubling down on. I really like that you said at some jobs you may go in only knowing like 40% of what's going on. And I was at a training actually when this airs, it'll be a month ago, where the lady, and I don't know where she quoted it from, but she said that when somebody's thinking about applying for a job, and you probably know where I'm going here,
Yep.
that if there's 10-point scale or 10 things that people have to accomplish, women have to do 10 of 10, where men, she said, the average, based on the studies that they did, they only have to do 4 of 10. So
Yes.
you kind of broke the mold in terms of your approach. But what would you say to women that might
Yeah.
be hesitating because they only have 8 out of the 10 things that are asked in the job?
Yeah, let me tell you, Tino, I quote that study all the time. And again, especially if I'm talking to young women, I'm like, get over it. You do not have to know everything. And one of the things that I use as a really stark example is when I became the president of Church's Chicken. My background at that point had been marketing and strategy, right?
Yeah.
And back in those days, that long ago, you didn't get the leadership job if you were marketing, you got it if you were finance or operations. So it was just as big a deal that I was the first woman to lead a fast food chain that I was a marketing person. And so let me enumerate for you the things I didn't know. I didn't know real estate, never been in that. I didn't know HR except what I'd had to deal with, with my own team. I don't have an MBA. So, of course I understood the P&L, but
Yeah.
I'd never, I mean, I could go on and on with what I didn't know,
Right.
but there is no way I would have said no to that job. It didn't take me 30 seconds because I knew what we needed to do. And again, I'd already been in that role since I had been the marketing person. I knew the smart people on the team. I had a phenomenal group. And then I also knew, frankly, to be just frank, where the weak links were and where we needed new talent. So I knew that with people helping me, we could make it happen. And another pretty stark example was going to Komen because that was my first nonprofit. I'd never done fundraising. I'd never done health science. I just never, and I moved to Dallas to do it, and so but that's for me, it's like I really don't want women to, especially women, to miss opportunities because they don't understand that they can figure it out and the resources are there for them. And you just got to have the nerve to do it.
Yeah. That's great. And that's a good segue into the next question, which I was going to ask you about. And I've heard you talk about this before, sponsors and mentors
Yeah.
and the
Yeah.
importance of that and maybe how it's impacted you and in your life.
Yeah, I think we all know this by now that mentors are great and it's a really wonderful thing to do. But you really people need sponsors. They need someone who is higher up or at least very well respected in an organization to be willing to stick their neck out for you to say, yeah, listen, watch this person. They're going to be great. And I will tell you the biggest sponsor I've had was Frank Bellotti. And again, it was when I was at churches, and it was AFC, and we had churches and Popeyes and a bagel shop and Terrafazione Italian coffee. We had a portfolio of restaurant companies. And, Frank watched me with the franchisees and with the marketing and understanding the P&L and getting the money to the bottom line. And he was my sponsor in that getting that job. And because and I was in my late 30s, so I was so young. I don't know if I would have been banging the door down to get it. I might not have had that much nerve. But when Frank, sponsored me for it, so if you get a sponsor, it's a great thing. Again, I love women who are willing to mentor other women. I've enjoyed mentoring women before. Um, and that's great, but a sponsor, it really matters.
Yeah. So at 45, you were diagnosed with stage 2 breast cancer, and I read that you discovered it in a self-exam, as my daughter, you and I have talked about this before, did as well. Went through chemo and much more. So, message about health to women, or how people how you did that, because that was probably, I'm assuming, life-saving that you found it relatively early.
Yeah, I think so. So, my message to women and men and anybody
Yeah.
is, be proactive. Look, there are tests, there are things that you're recommended to do, and many of us, and I had been guilty myself, skip those things to really take care of ourselves. And look, and it's a cliche, but a cliche for a reason. If you don't have your health, you don't have anything, because you can't be productive at work. Sometimes you can't even work, etc. And the other message I have about healthcare is if you have something that you need to be in the healthcare system about, you really need to advocate for yourself, because healthcare professionals are very busy. They have a lot of patients, and they have it's just, and it can be very complex, especially if you have something that has chemo over here, radiation over there, surgery here, a follow-up surgery there. It's just a lot. And to get those things, to advocate for yourself from a health perspective and even the timing perspective, and if you can't do it yourself, get somebody to go with you and be there with you. I learned, unfortunately, too much about this at Komen, where people who didn't understand how to advocate for themselves got less care, or the care was just more difficult for them. So that's one of my crusades.
Yeah.
It's is advocating for yourself when you're in that system.
Yeah, no, that's a good point, particularly now with the shortages and rural area
Mhm.
challenges, that sort of
Yeah,
thing.
absolutely.
So since this is theme is leading with relevance, I always like to have some leadership questions. So how would you describe your leadership style today? And can you reflect on key lessons from your early career that's shaped your leadership approach today? How much has it changed or not changed?
You know what? It's interesting. I'm not 100% sure that it's changed a lot.
Yeah.
Um, because I'm a pretty natural person. I mean, and I tell people this too. It takes way too much energy to be someone you're not, and I am naturally fairly blunt and naturally fairly aggressive about talking about things that I care about and know about. So, and so that's just my personality. I was probably a little bit more reserved in my early years. And my team right now might say they might wish I could just go back a little bit and chill out. Because,
Yeah.
and look, at this age and stage, and the team here, the people here are so talented and so great. You just tell them, and ask the questions and tell them and move on. But the one thing I do remember when I first got the job at churches, as being the president, when you're, let's say, just running marketing or just running something else, and especially if you're young in your career, and if you're a bit of a control freak and you want things done exactly right or whatever, you haven't learned to delegate.
Yeah.
And so I do remember about 3 months in, my CFO at the time, said, wanted to talk to me. And I said, sure. And he said, look, you're gonna have to let some of this stuff go. He goes, you're driving us all crazy
Oh,
because I think and I was trying to learn too. I was trying to
yeah.
absorb everything. And he was older and been at Pizza Hut. So, he was exactly the right person to tell me, look, you can't do it all now. You're running a big thing, not one department. And it was a really great lesson for me and learning how to delegate is one of the best things in the world. And let me tell you, once I learned it, I'm really good at it now. I mean, I might still ask you questions and I might still read a document or whatever, but I know how to ask people who are smarter than I am on things to get something done. And it's so freeing, but I had to learn it. And if
Yeah.
there's a difference, that's it.
Well, would you say too that probably in the past there was a more an acceptance of like a command and control style, and now it's more of a servant leader style, or
And I don't know that I would ever call mine a command and control, but I did, I did just feel such a responsibility. I did want
yeah,
to know things and make sure they were right and all that. And I still have that, let's make sure it's right, everybody, kind of thing. But yeah, command and control is really at the end of the day no fun for anybody. And it's, and the other thing is maybe if I don't know if they would call it demanding or not, but I'm also, and not because I'm trying, it's just the way I feel about the people here. I also care deeply about each of them. We have a lot of talks about a lot of different things. I'm so impressed with them as people. I'm so impressed with the art they put out. And so you can ask for a lot of work and great work and still be a servant leader. You just can't.
right, right, right. No, that's a good point. So you've had such an amazing career, and you still have a career, but can you point a couple things that you're most proud of? I know you have a whole list, but
One of the things that has come to me since President Carter passed away is another thing is back to Frank Bellotti, he would give you goals that were this high and you'd freak out, but because he gave you goals that were above your head, you would at least get to the top of your head, right?
right,
And
right.
so that was one of his techniques. And I will never forget being with him, and we were being partners with the Habitat for Humanity. And he said to me, Hala, I want you to build at churches 200 houses within the next 2 years. And I'm like, well, let me see how in the world I'm going to do that. Because at that time, and we built um, and we're building a lot in Atlanta and Dallas because they were two of our big markets. And even back then, building a Habitat house in Atlanta and Dallas was about $50,000.
Yeah,
And so
wow.
of course, I had to raise the money. I couldn't just take it off the bottom line. And so I was just daunted at first, and then but we were raising money and our customers were helping us, even though our consumer set wasn't the most well-heeled, but we had people helping us. But I got the idea. I'm like, okay, it cost about $10,000 to build a house in Africa. There's some countries around the world, like the Philippines and some others, where it only costs 5,000 to build a house. So I'm going to build 200 houses in the time frame, but they're just not all going to be in America. And that was fine because we were in 15 countries at the time.
Yeah,
So I went on 5 Jimmy Carter Habitat bills, those big international bills, went to the Philippines. Where else? I went to Africa with him, South Africa. We did 3 in the US. And so I got to fulfill that thing, and it was because I got the challenge from somebody who really cared. And then I just figured out some clever ways to do it
You do it.
because
Yeah.
raising 200 times 50,000 wasn't going to happen, right?
Right. Right.
So that's one of the things that I'm very proud of. And I'm proud of my time at the chamber. I'm super proud of my time here. Um, yeah, listen, I am a very, very fortunate person because I've had a great career, tremendous family, fabulous husband. And one thing I always try to add when I'm talking about doing all these things is my husband's parents lived in Atlanta when we had small kids. And let me tell you, that was such a helpful thing. And
Yeah.
I don't want people to think you got to ask for help. And if you're lucky enough to have a great mate and a couple of in-laws in town, that's a good thing.
Yeah. In-laws in town are a good thing. That's why all my kids moved back to town.
That's exactly right. I know. Yeah, mine too. They're both back finally. It took me a
Yeah.
long time to get them here, but they're both back.
I remember that story. So flipping it around here, many times we learn a lot from our failures or missteps. You want to share something that maybe was a setback or something that was tough, but how you got by?
Yeah, there's one thing at churches that I kind of knew from an instinct standpoint. I just knew it wasn't the right thing to do, but we all got caught up in it and we got all this momentum around it. And instead of having the courage to go with my instinct and say, guys, we're throwing a lot of good money after bad, and we should stop this now and focus. What we were doing is, we loved churches, but churches wasn't exactly cocktail party chatter. So there were a lot of people, on the board and everything who wanted churches to be something more. So we tried to put in almost a double Mexican restaurant within churches. And we did it, in order to test it, we did it, in a handful of restaurants and spent a lot of time and effort on it. And it didn't work. And the thing is, I never was 100% there,
It was gonna work.
but not trusting my instinct is when things get me in trouble. And then again, I'll just admit it, not having the courage to speak up and say, this is probably not going to work. Do we really want to spend the money? I didn't have that courage. And I think I would have it now, but I didn't then.
Yeah.
Um, and another thing I've learned is that occasionally I think I just persevere too long. There are just sometimes you're going to have to let something go. And, as you get older, you learn about places, and, it'd be hard to come up with very specific examples, but
Yeah.
um, because I don't want to lose and because if I really care about something, but there are some times when perseverance can go too
Too
far
far.
and you just have to let it go. And I'm trying to learn that still.
So the workforce is changing. Assuming you have a lot of Zs and the millennials, the alphas are coming. There's all the different populations. But what would you say like now in the workforce in terms of what the younger people want? Is it different than what, past generations? You have a lot of young people working for you now, I'm sure.
Yes, we do. And I think I have to be honest and say, it is different. I mean, look, I am a, square in the baby boomer generation, and everybody, we know what we were raised on. And
Right.
it's like you work to, I mean, we know what that looks like.
Yeah.
And we know the mistakes that we made as a generation that has left the world, not as great for some of these younger generations. And so I'm owning that completely. Um, and I'll tell you this, it's interesting because, when millennials first came on the scene, everybody's like, oh my God, this new millennial group
Yeah.
or whatever. Here's what I found about that particular group that I really admire, at least the ones that I know, and my two, and my four, now that they're married, is that look, they're going to work hard. They care about what they're doing. They care about their jobs. They care about making a difference, but they are not going to not take a vacation. They're not going to not be with their children. They just are, I think, doing it a little bit more right than maybe I did when I was, in that stage. And so I really admire them for that. I really do. And my other comment is I feel for Gen Z. I really feel for those individuals who didn't get to have a normal college life or high school life because of COVID. I feel for them that they've grown up with the screen piece and with the screen piece before everybody started freaking out about it. I feel for them. I think they do have some more needs. And again, I consider myself an empathetic leader. I do want results. I mean, again, we're spending somebody else's money.
Yeah,
But I feel for that generation. I do. I think it's been harder. And kind of going back to the millennials, I mean, my son graduated from college in 2008, and he and a bunch of friends had all these fancy jobs, some on Wall Street here and there, and they got rescinded in 2008, the job
yeah,
offers. So these two generations have had it a little bit tough, and I
yeah,
have empathy for that.
yeah. Thanks for sharing that. So, what's in store at Woodruff? And so you're also responsible for the Alliance side. How does that work?
Well, here's the way the whole thing works.
Yeah,
We're one 501(c)(3) at
right,
Woodruff, which is wonderful. And we have three incredible art partners. I mean, it's the High Museum of Art, the
right.
Atlanta Symphony Orchestra, and the Alliance Theater.
Okay.
And we are the third largest in the country in terms of a performing arts center. And we're the only ones in the country that have two performing arts and a visual arts on the same campus. So we're pretty unique and pretty
Yeah,
well known around the country. We do a lot of work in education. We're starting to work in a space called neuro arts, and that's about how arts affect the brain in terms of mental, physical health, productivity, you name it. So we're working on a lot of things here that are exciting, and the art is exquisite. I mean, look, this job is this job is easy in one way, and that way is that all three of these art partners have, again, exquisite art. They have exquisite talent. They know what they're doing. That is not my job. My job is to try to run the operations piece of this, the shared services like finance, accounting, IT, and try to raise money so that they get to do more art. So more money, more mission, more money. And that's kind of the circle that I'm trying to be responsible for this group.
so those listening, feel free to donate freely and visit all of those wonderful locations as I have. How is AI playing into this, Hala? Are I've heard different parts of it. Obviously, I have an actress daughter, so
Yep.
they were on strike with the rest of them in terms of some concerns, but also some good things.
Yeah, it's really exactly as you describe. I think it's got the good and the bad in terms of art, because there are people, and I don't blame them all around the writing piece and the things that could be, taken away from real human beings. So I certainly understand that. We were affected, during the strike, and still are a little bit, because we actually take advantage of the film tax credit.
Right.
And because we are able to, at the Symphony and the Alliance, both do a TV series around the orchestra players, and then around the Alliance plays. So we filled that. And then at the same time, we'll be doing some, extraordinary exhibit at the High is coming up. And that has quantum computing producing some of the algorithms that make the art. So that's like, wow, and it's
Yeah.
extraordinary. So you've got, from the we don't want to hurt our artists all the way to there's AI's making art. I mean, forget AI, quantum computing.
Yeah.
And then yeah, and we everything else around here is pretty straightforward. So and I mean I use Chat GPT all the time, but not to write things. It's just because I
Yeah.
can get a quicker answer out of them on something than I can doing a Google search.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we have time for a couple more questions. I want to go to some of the juicy ones here. I think they're good. How do you foster, so you've worked with a lot of companies, but open communication, a lot of times it's difficult even for the best CEOs to have people be able to tell you straight out, what they're thinking if they disagree or what have you, because they're concerned about repercussions or whatever it might be. How have you done that, Halo, over the years?
Part of it, I think, is just, again, being a friendly, open person, and being, the proverbial vulnerable in this sense. I mean, I share a lot of stuff with them, about my family, the grandkids, and all that kind of stuff. So part of the reason that I think that this group here, and I'm laughing because a couple of them, they'll say anything to me because they want to get my goat, but they want to make a point too, right? So, yeah, I think the fact that we're friends, and they know I get really excited about some things, and they know that I will listen if they have a different viewpoint, and
Yeah.
believe me, again, it's back to the reason I felt like I could take these jobs with not knowing everything. I know that there are people who are smarter than I am who are working with me, and I will always hire that way. And then, if nothing else, there are people who are smarter than I in certain areas, finance, general counsel, etc. And I need their input. So
Yeah.
there's no way I would want to be running something where I thought people wouldn't tell me what they thought.
Yeah.
And they know that I might push back because I might be, so invested or whatever, but they're not going to leave me hanging. And part of that is because they love the organization and they are people of integrity. And when I say that, I mean not only general integrity, but work integrity. They are going to take care of the Woodruff Arts Center, and so they will speak up when they need to speak up.
Well, and too, what I kind of reading between the lines there, it sounds like and I know you, and you're a great leader. So, that you've broken down the barriers in a sincere way because you're open.
Yeah.
And so people will also be open with you and they'll see there's not any, sort of
Yeah.
repercussions, but
Yeah.
that's what you want. So, congratulations on that. So, last question for you. Someone that's deeply involved with mentoring future leaders, what advice would you give them if you had one thing to give them in terms of if they're starting out in their careers?
Yeah. And I say this one all the time, and it's a little hard to define, but I just say to them, be highly engaged in what you're doing. And I don't know if you've seen this over the years, Tino, but and there's always a bell curve on everything, and people are different. Introverts obviously approach their work very differently than extroverts, and that is another gigantic learning that I learned at Komen. I learned to stop and listen and take time for the introverts to process what I had asked them. I mean, it was a big, big learning for me. I'm not saying I don't sometimes probably, push into too much, but that was a big learning I should have mentioned. But what I tell everybody is be engaged in your work because it shows up. And if you don't love what you're doing enough, or you don't love the company enough or the organization enough to be engaged, to be curious, to be the one who wants to try to solve that problem, to be the one who wants to do some of this work, then maybe it's not the right place for you. And it's hard when you're young because, and I've seen this a little bit with my kids, and I remember it too, when you have your first job, you're doing some of the more menial tasks. And so it might be hard to show your level of engagement, but I'm very attracted to people who are just engaged,
Yeah,
just at the highest level, because it's just not right for the organization or for the individual if you're not into what
yeah.
you're doing, what the bigger task is.
So be engaged or find something that else that you can do where you will be engaged.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, Hala, as always, thanks. Thanks for joining me on Leading with Relevance. You're someone I've always admired from
Oh,
afar, and when we get together, it's always special. So, thank you.